I should have known the day would turn on me the moment I walked into the office and felt the air shift to quiet, to watchful. Mondays were usually chaotic here. Printers whining, phones ringing, the marketing team already arguing about fonts. But that morning, everything was unusually controlled, as if someone had pressed a mute button on an entire building. I didn't think much of it at first. I just tightened my ponytail, hugged my laptop against my chest, and made my way toward my office like I had every day for the past 6 years. I had just set my coffee down when my phone buzzed. Conference hall. Now, no name, just the message. But I knew who it was. My husband, my CEO husband, never used unnecessary words. I took a breath, straightened my blazer, and headed toward the hole. Maybe it was about the merger. Maybe it was one of his infamous motivational speeches where he talked for 45 minutes about resilience while the rest of us silently planned our grocery lists. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, certainly nothing that had to do with me. But the moment I stepped inside, every head turned toward me. Every intern, every manager, the board, even the receptionist who never left her desk. They weren't just gathering, they were waiting for me. My hand froze on the door. What's going on? My husband didn't answer immediately. He stood on the small stage at the front of the hall, his expression as crisp and cold as the navy suit he wore. He didn't smile. He didn't gesture for me to sit. He just watched me walk forward, eyes unreadable, like I was a stranger who had interrupted a meeting I had no business attending. Come here, he said finally. The command hit the room like a slap. People shifted, uncomfortable. A few looked at me with pity. Others tried to mask their curiosity behind sympathetic frowns. I felt their stares moving with me as I stepped closer, like I was being marched towards some invisible line I didn't know I had crossed. I opened my mouth to ask what this was about, but he raised a hand, silencing me. We'll keep this brief. My throat tightened. He cleared his throat, gaze sweeping across the crowd. As of today, he said, with steady, formal, completely devoid of warmth, you are suspended from duty, effective immediately. For a second, I didn't understand the words. They scattered round me like loose papers caught in wind. Suspended me. A few gasps rippled through the room. Someone dropped a pen. I felt the blood drain from my face as confusion twisted into a slow, numbing ache. What? I whispered, barely audible. His eyes finally met mine, and they were so indifferent they felt like ice pressed against skin. You heard me. No explanation. No reason. No private conversation beforehand. Nothing. Just a public execution disguised as a corporate announcement. I felt humiliation burn behind my eyes, threatening to spill over. My fingers trembled as I wrapped my arms around myself. I waited, hoped for some clarification, some statement about protocol, an accusation I could at least defend against. But he just stood there, hands clasped behind his back, like some proud commander delivering orders. I expect professionalism during this transition, he added. His tone aimed not at me, but at the room. Let's maintain respect and discretion. Respect, discretion. Where had those been for me? I tried again, voice cracking. Can we talk privately? His expression didn't move. There's nothing to discuss. The words sliced cleaner than any knife. Nothing to discuss. Our marriage, my career, my reputation. All dismissed like a meeting running over time. I felt dozens of eyes burning into me. Some horrified, some fascinated, some already texting someone under the table. But I couldn't move. It was like my shoes had melted into the floor. I had been humiliated publicly, stripped of my dignity by the man who shared my bed, and he stood there acting like I was an HR-ish, not his wife. Finally, my body remembered how to breathe, and I stepped back, then another step. My vision blurred. As I turned away, the murmur swelling behind me like a tide rising to swallow what was left of my pride. I walked out of that room numb, hollowed out, my heart pounding against my ribs like it was trying to escape. He had suspended me, publicly, coldly, cruelly. But what he didn't know, what he had never bothered to learn, was that the company he believed he world didn't actually stand on his brilliance. It stood on a foundation built by someone else, someone he had underestimated, someone with a secret he never thought to ask about. And by morning, that secret would cost him everything. Before the humiliation, before the icy stare in that conference hall, there was once a version of him I believed in, or maybe a version he performed so flawlessly that I mistook it for sincerity. My memory drifts back to the early days when I still thought charm meant goodness and ambition meant partnership. He wasn't the CEO then. He wasn't even close. He was the ambitious young analyst everyone found magnetic. He had that polished, clean-cut confidence that made people lean in when he spoke. The women in the office whispered about him. The men admired him, and his supervisors treated him like the next rising star. And in those early moments, he treated me like I was the only person who truly saw him. We met in the company cafeteria. Of all places, he'd complimented the book I was reading, made a joke about how he hadn't touched a novel since college, and somehow still managed to sound endearing rather than arrogant. He listened when I spoke. He asked questions. He laughed easily. He made me feel like the brightest person in the room. But looking back, that was the first sign he didn't like sharing the spotlight. He liked discovering brilliance in others as long as he could bask in the reflection. In those days, he'd bring me coffee without being asked, surprise me with small notes on my desk, insist I take credit for ideas during meetings. He was attentive, caring, soft in ways that now feel like they belong to a stranger. He'd touch my hand under the table, wink at me before giving a presentation, rest his head on my shoulder on nights we stayed late working on research together. He made me believe I was essential to his life, his balance, his grounding force. But somewhere between every promotion and every applause he collected, the man I married started to fracture into someone else. Someone harder, someone hungry for admiration in a way that devoured everything around him. The red flags weren't dramatic. They were subtle, almost polite. He'd correct my phrasing in front of friends. He'd downplay my achievements with a lazy, "Well, she's always been the smart one," as if intelligence were some inconvenient gift I carried around. He'd grow irritated when someone praised me in a meeting longer than they praised him. At first, I chalked it up to stress, the weight of climbing the ladder, the pressure he always carried like a second skin. But the higher he rose, the more he needed the world to orbit around him, the more he needed admiration like oxygen, and the more threatened he seemed by my competence, my skills, the quiet influence I held with the staff. He loved the idea of being the brilliant CEO and the idea of me being the quiet, supportive wife in the background. I played the part he wanted. I wrote memos for him at midnight. I prepared presentations he delivered. I smoothed his rough edges in front of the board. I stepped back so he could step forward. And he rewarded my silence with affection, conditional affection, the kind that depended on how brightly he shone that day, the kind that dimmed whenever my light grew a little too noticeable. He wanted a partner at home, but an accessory at work. I ignored more than I should have. The way he'd scan a room to see who was watching before kissing me, the way he'd get irritated if I dressed too sharp for an event, the way he'd tell stories about our life, but revise my part in them. He didn't want me beside him. He wanted me behind him. And I loved him enough not to see the danger in that, until the day he humiliated me. Until the moment I saw the final evolution of every red flag I had excused. But long before any of that, years ago, his mentor, a man who had always been strangely fond of me, who saw more than he ever said, pulled me aside after a company dinner. He looked at me with an expression I didn't understand back then and murmured, "One day, you'll hold more power than you think." At the time, I thought he was simply being kind. Now, I realize it was a warning or a prophecy. The moment the meeting ended, the room dissolved into a blur of shuffling papers, forced coughs, and people pretending they suddenly had urgent tasks to sprint toward. No one looked at me. Not directly, Their eyes flicked over me like I was a spilled drink on the floor, something embarrassing. Something they wanted to avoid stepping in. Minutes earlier, I'd been their colleague, their problem solver, the person they trusted when everything else felt chaotic. Now I was an inconvenience, a headline waiting to happen. I stood frozen for a moment, unable to move, unsure if my legs would even hold me. My husband, my CEO, walked out without glancing back, flanked by the department heads who nodded along to whatever he was saying, as if my humiliation had to be immediately filed under irrelevant. I didn't even get a chance to speak, to breathe, to defend myself. I was simply removed. When I finally forced myself back to my office, a new email notification appeared. HR department, formal notice of suspension. The wording was so sterile it almost stung more than the meeting. Effective immediately. Pending review, refrain from accessing internal files. Return your company laptop within 24 hours. It didn't sound like a question. It sounded like a judgment already decided, signed with a digital signature from someone who never spoke to me unless it was about scheduling wellness seminars. I reread it 3 times, each time feeling a new insult rising in my throat. No explanation, no specifics, just called procedure. And of course, HR had CC'd to board members for documentation. They'd say, for transparency. But I knew better. They wanted witnesses. They wanted a paper trail in case this became a headline or a lawsuit. The email felt like a coffin lid sliding shut. As I walked through the hallway, I heard whispering. Not outright words, no one was stupid enough for that, but the hissed fragments traveled through the air like poison. Did you hear? She must have done something. He wouldn't suspend his own wife unless. I kept my head down. I told myself to breathe. I told myself not to let them see how much it burned. I reached my office and stared at the photos on my desk, moments of us smiling at company galas, at charity events, and trips that now felt like they belonged to strangers pretending to be happy. My hands shook as I placed them face down one by one. My wedding ring felt heavier than usual, as if mocking me. As I packed my things, a tightness formed in my chest. Rumors would multiply by the hour. People loved scandal more than truth, and he knew that. My husband understood optics better than loyalty. While I sat drowning in shame, he was probably already crafting his narrative, ensuring he came out clean, powerful, and touchable. The perfect CEO making a difficult but necessary decision. I was zipping my bag when someone knocked lightly on my door. I didn't turn. If you're here to take my laptop, it's on the table. A quiet voice answered. It's not about the laptop. I spun around. It was the CFO Mark, a man known for being icy, analytical, almost brutally composed. He rarely involved himself in interpersonal drama. He preferred spreadsheets over people. Yet now, for the first time since I'd known him, he looked troubled. He stepped inside and closed the door. I don't have much time, he said, glancing down the hallway. But you need to know something. I felt my pulse spike. What now? Are they firing me completely? He shook his head. No, not yet. But listen, he thinks the company is all his. He thinks he's untouchable. But he's wrong. I stared at him, confused and tired. What are you talking about? Mark reached into his jacket. His expression softened for a split second, something like respect, or maybe pity. Your suspension isn't about performance, he said quietly. It's about control. He's afraid of losing his grip, and he doesn't know the one thing that could change everything. Before I could ask, he held out a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front, in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. The mentor's handwriting. My breath caught. Mark whispered, open this when you're alone, and whatever you do, don't tell him you have it. Then he left quickly, without another word, leaving me standing in my half-packed office, clutching a message from the one man who had always protected me, a letter that might explain why my husband suddenly feared me. I didn't open the envelope at the office. I couldn't. My hands were shaking violently, and every instinct screamed that whatever was inside wasn't meant for fluorescent lighting and cubicle walls. So I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The envelope sitting on the passenger seat like it was alive, like it was breathing. The house felt colder than usual when I walked in. Or maybe I was the cold one. Maybe humiliation had drained all warmth from my body. I set my bag down, locked the door, and stood in the entryway with the envelope trembling between my fingers. It felt heavier than paper should feel, like it carried something final. I moved to the dining table, sat slowly, and stared at my name written in his handwriting, my mentor's handwriting steady, elegant, deliberate. It had been nearly 2 years since he passed, and yet here he was, reaching out to me through ink and time. I inhaled once, deeply. Then I tore it open. A thick stack of documents slid out. At first, I saw legal letterhead, signatures, stamps, then numbers, percentages, transfer clauses, voting rights. My name repeated over and over, appearing where a beneficiaries would go. I flipped through the pages with rising disbelief until one sentence slapped me like a physical blow. Effective immediately upon my passing, I'd transfer 47% of company ownership and full associated voting rights to her. Her? Me? I read it 3 times, mouthing the words because they didn't seem real. 47%, a number that wasn't random, a number that wasn't passive, a number that had the power to topple CEOs and reroute entire corporations. My breath hitched, my heart pounded. He left it to me and not to my husband. I pressed a hand over my mouth as the realization washed over me. The mentor had trusted me, believed in me, saw something in me that he didn't see in the man he'd been grooming to take over the company. A tremor ran through my fingers as I traced the mentor's signature. The memory of his warm smile flashed across my mind. The way he'd always encourage me in private. The way he'd ask for my opinions even when everyone else in the room deferred to my husband. And suddenly, his last strange words replayed in my head with frightening clarity. One day, you'll hold more power than you think. I thought it was a compliment. Now it felt like fate. But the shock didn't stop there. Beneath the ownership documents was a handwritten note short, concise, and unmistakably his voice. Use this only when the time comes. And trust yourself more than you trust him. Him? There was no ambiguity about who that referred to. My throat tightened. My mentor had known. He'd seen the parts of my husband I tried so hard not to look at. But another question hit me like a punch to the ribs. Why didn't my husband know? He should have known everything about the company. He micromanaged everything, controlled everything. He thrived on information and despised surprises. Yet this 47% had been hidden from him, unless the mentor hid it intentionally, unless the board helped bury the paperwork, unless someone feared what my husband would do if he learned the truth. And another question followed, darker and sharper. Why now? Why suspend me now? Had he sensed something? Had someone slipped up? Had he discovered a piece, not the whole truth, but enough to make him panic? I leaned back in my chair, stunned. The room spinning slightly as I tried to fit the pieces together. The humiliation at the office wasn't disciplinary. It wasn't even strategic. It was a reaction, a preemptive strike, a desperate power grab from a man who felt something slipping out of his control. Could he have known about the envelope? Or was this all coincidental timing collapsing into revelation? A knot formed in my stomach. Someone inside the company knew the truth, Mark. The CFO, for one, maybe others. And if they knew, for how long had they watched him operate without realizing he was no longer the most powerful person in the room? I picked up the documents again, reading each line slower this time. 47%, not majority, but enough to swing every board vote, enough to freeze decisions, enough to remove a CEO, enough to take back everything he thought he owned. But I didn't call anyone. I didn't confront him. I didn't let even a flicker of the truth slip out. Not yet. The mentor's final message echoed in my mind. Use this only when the time comes. And I knew the time wasn't now. Not until I understood why my husband had moved against me so abruptly. Not until I knew who was loyal, who was scared, and who was manipulating the chaos. So I gathered the papers, locked them in a safe, and sat alone in the dimly lit room. I had 47% of a company I helped build. 47% he had no idea belonged to me. And now, for the first time since the humiliation, a spark lit in my chest, small, sharp, dangerous. I would investigate, quietly, strategically, ruthlessly, if I had to, because he had made one unforgivable mistake. He thought suspending me silenced me, but he had no idea who he had just provoked. I waited until well past sunset before driving back to the office. The building looked different at night, emptier, darker, stripped of the usual hum of activity. For the first time all day, I didn't feel eyes on me. No whispers, no pity, just silence. A perfect place to start digging. My badge still worked. That alone told me HR's cold little email was nothing more than a performance, probably executed under his orders. He wanted the humiliation. He wanted the spectacle, but he hadn't bothered to follow through with the details. That was his flaw. He loved grand gestures so much he forgot the groundwork beneath them. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like ascending into a memory I no longer recognized. This floor was where the mentor used to sit, where he used to call me in for advice disguised as casual conversation. I could almost hear his voice as I stepped out, steady and warm, reminding me to always pay attention to the numbers. They reveal more than people do. I unlocked my old office, turned on only the desk lamp, and closed the door behind me. My suspension wasn't effective yet. They hadn't revoked access. That gave me a narrow window, one I intended to use. I started with emails, sorting by date, sender, and flagged conversations. Nothing obvious. My husband was arrogant, not stupid, but arrogance leaves footprints, especially when paired with entitlement. The deeper I dug, the more small anomalies I found. Approvals given at strange hours, rushed signatures, vague explanations in financial memos. Then I pulled up old board minutes. Most were routine, but hidden between lines of corporate jargon were moments I'd forgotten. The mentor's subtle questions about cash flow, his insistence on transparency, his disagreements with my husband over aggressive expansion. At the time, I thought they were normal growing pains between leadership personalities. Now they looked like warnings. I leaned back, rubbing my temples, and suddenly a memory surfaced. I was standing in the mentor's office years ago, sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and he was telling me, the danger isn't ambition, it's ambition without discipline. Watch for that. I never realized he wasn't talking about the company. He was talking about the man I'd married. I turned to the financial archives next. If there was a leak, it would be buried there. I combed through quarterly reports, narrowing down months where cash reserves dipped without clear justification. 3 separate quarters showed discrepancies, small enough to ignore individually, but together, suspicious. My pulse quickened. This wasn't mismanagement. It was intentional. I checked internal transfers. That's when I spotted the first one, an account number I didn't recognize, receiving recurring amounts just below the threshold requiring board approval. Not large enough to raise alarms, but consistent. I cross-referenced project budgets, pulling up documents I hadn't looked at in years. My husband's signature appeared over and over, approving miscellaneous operational adjustments. A familiar chill crept down my spine. This wasn't new. This pattern went back long before the mentor died. My breath grew shallow as I opened another year's worth of reports. Same dips, same transfers, same pattern. All roads pointed to that unfamiliar account number. Whoever owned it had been siphoning money quietly for years. The company wasn't bleeding, it was being drained. I pushed back from the desk, heart pounding. I tried to steady my breathing, but questions were attacking me all at once. Had the mentor discovered this? Had he left me the 47% to protect the company, or to give me the power to expose the truth? Had his trust in me been part of a larger plan to safeguard everything he built? I closed my eyes for a moment, seeing the mentor's face the last time we spoke. He looked tired, then more tired than usual, but he still asked about my ideas, my thoughts, as if mine were the only opinions that mattered. He knew something. He must have known. When I opened my eyes, I felt a strange clarity settle inside me, a conviction I hadn't felt since before my suspension. I wasn't just investigating a humiliation anymore. I was unearthing rot that my husband carefully hid under layers of charm and corporate polish. I typed in the unfamiliar account number again, following the digital trail into the restricted finance portal. A warning flashed. Administrative access required. I almost gave up, but then I remembered the mentor had given me his master login once during a software overhaul, telling me, keep this. Some things are too important to leave behind. My hands trembled as I typed in the credentials. The portal opened instantly, and there it was, not one account, five, all linked to my husband, each one filled with stolen company funds. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, rage and disbelief swirling together like poison. He hadn't just betrayed me, he'd betrayed the entire company, the mentor, everything we had built. The lamp flickered slightly, throwing shadows across the room. My phone vibrated in my pocket, startling me. A text from the CFO. Have you found it yet? My blood ran cold. Someone else knew. Someone else was watching. And then, as if the universe wanted to suffocate me with truth, another alert popped on the screen. A sixth account, just created, in my husband's name. And the most recent transfer, scheduled for tomorrow morning. The exact time he suspended me. I don't know what exactly pushed me to open the HR database next. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way my hands moved on their own, clicking through folders I'd never bothered to explore. Or maybe it was because deep down, beneath the shock and anger, I already knew there was more. Betrayal doesn't show up alone, it brings friends, lies, secrets, patterns. I searched for expense reports first. My husband's, specifically. Most CEOs keep theirs tidy. His were immaculate to immaculate. Everything perfectly categorized, perfectly justified, perfectly clean. Except that perfection itself felt suspicious. I click open the archived receipts HR had on file. There they were, the red flags I had refused to see. Charges for client appeasement dinners at restaurants we had never stepped foot in together. Two-person reservations at hotels across the city. The kind only executives use when they want proximity without questions. Late-night transportation invoices filed under urgent negotiations. Time-stamped at hours where negotiations didn't happen unless they involved bodies, not contracts. My chest tightened as more files loaded. Room service bills for two. Spot charges. Complimentary champagne, none of which belonged in corporate paperwork. I scrolled further until a particular invoice froze me. A suite booked under his name 3 nights in a row. The guest listed beside him, a woman from his department. A woman he had promoted rapidly last year. A woman he praised a little too often. A woman who always smiled at me like she pitied me. My stomach lurched. I should have felt heartbreak. Maybe devastation, maybe disbelief. But what I felt instead was clarity, icy, sharp, settling into my bones like truth that had been waiting too long to be acknowledged. His humiliation of me at the office hadn't been a power flex. It was a distraction. He needed me out before the audit, before the quarterly review, before anyone with authority could ask questions about the missing funds. And what better way to clean house than by publicly suspending his wife, make it look like I was unprofessional, unstable, a liability. He thought the shame would bury me. He thought I would retreat, hide, break. But he had forgotten who I was before I became his accessory. I clicked into the emails between him and HR, and the truth slashed through me like a blade. He had orchestrated everything. He told them to prepare documentation justifying performance concerns to be used if she reacts emotionally. He had already drafted my termination letter, already arranged for his mistress to temporarily assist with executive operations. He was replacing me, at home, at the company, in every space I had helped him build. Screenshots, receipts, travel logs, they formed a mosaic of betrayal. And suddenly the suspension made even more sense. If I wasn't around when the financial discrepancies surfaced, he could pin the missing money on me. A CEO exposing his wife's mismanagement. The board would have believed it, unless, of course, his wife owned 47%. I leaned back in my chair, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping my throat. For years, I had convinced myself that he was just ambitious, just stressed, just driven. But ambition doesn't book hotel rooms. Stress doesn't send roses to another woman. Drive doesn't humiliate your partner in front of an entire office to save your own skin. No, this was greed. This was ego. This was who he truly was. And he had no idea I knew. He thought I would crumble. He thought I would disappear quietly. But I wasn't the weak wife he imagined. I was the woman his mentor trusted more than him. The woman holding 47%. The woman who had finally seen the whole truth. And I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't sleep that night. Every hour brought new calculations, new realizations, new pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. By the time dawn threatened the horizon, I knew I couldn't face this alone. I needed allies, people who understood the company, the mentor's intentions, and most importantly, the CEO's weaknesses. I needed insiders who wouldn't crumble under fear or loyalty to the man who had humiliated me. I started with Mark, the CFO. His expression when I walked into the small, dimly lit office said everything: shock, confusion, then recognition. He'd known something was off for years. He had always sensed the discrepancies, but had been too cautious or too terrified to confront them directly. I know everything, I said, letting my voice carry the weight of the previous days. The 47%, the mentor's transfer, the accounts, all of it. Mark leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. You actually have it? 47%? You realize what that means? I do, I said. I just need to know who I can trust. He nodded, almost reluctantly. I've been waiting for someone like you, someone with authority and vision to step in. The CEO has been reckless for years. Everyone knows it fraud, misappropriation, but no one acted. Fear kept us silent. Next, I contacted the company's legal advisor, Eleanor Hayes. Her office smelled faintly of coffee and old books, accompanying mix in the chaos. She was precise, deliberate, and unflappable, the kind of person who made tough decisions look like naturalists. I laid out everything: the 47%, the hidden accounts, the suspension, and finally, the evidence of the CEO's infidelity that reinforced his untrustworthiness. Her eyes widened briefly, but then she composed herself. If this is true, we can move immediately. You legally hold the stake. The board will have no choice but to acknowledge it. With proper filings, you can effectively assume control by morning. I could feel the weight of her words pressing into my chest, heavy but electric. A part of me thrilled at the idea. Finally, justice. Finally, retribution. Another part recoiled. Taking over would be more than financial. It would be moral, emotional. It would mean stepping fully into a role that would make him powerless. And I wasn't sure I was ready for that kind of victory. Finally, I reached out to Robert, the mentor's oldest board ally, the man who had seen the CEO's ego grow unchecked, who had once tried to warn him, and who had quietly protected the company when necessary. He arrived almost immediately, eyebrows raised, but his trust in me was clear. So the mentor was right, he said quietly. You were always meant to carry this forward. I explained my plan, my hesitation, the whirlwind of emotions that made my stomach twist. Robert placed a steadying hand on mine. Emotions will always pull you one way. But remember, the company, the employees, everything your mentor built needs your clarity. It's not about vengeance. It's about restoration. Mark and Eleanor exchanged a look, unspoken understanding passing between them. The three of them had been waiting for someone to act decisively, someone with authority and legitimacy. I had both, now, but the responsibility weighed heavily. Could I really wield power against the man I had once loved, against someone who had shared my life, my nights, my victories? We discussed strategy. The immediate priority was the board meeting. The documents proving my 47% stake were airtight, legally binding, and impossible to challenge without exposing the CEO's misconduct. Every vote could be influenced, every proxy accounted for. The plan was simple but brutal in its effectiveness. By morning, I could command the board, freeze the CEO's authority, and seize operational control. My hands shook as I reviewed the steps. Power felt intoxicating and terrifying all at once. The thought of confronting him, seeing him realize for the first time that the woman he humiliated had become the ultimate authority, part of me reveled in it. Part of me hesitated, heart twisting with the remnants of old love, with the moral weight of taking over someone I had once trusted. Eleanor's voice broke through my spiraling thoughts. You've done everything right. The papers, the evidence, the support. By dawn, you'll be the most powerful person in this company. But remember, this isn't just revenge. This is justice. Her words settled over me like a cold, steady flame. I realized I couldn't hesitate forever. Hesitation was a luxury I no longer had. The clock ticked past midnight. Outside, the city slept, unaware of the storm about to break inside the glass walls of the skyscraper where I had been humiliated only days ago. By morning, everything would change, and I would be ready. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft hum of the city beyond the window. I sank onto the couch, the envelope still on the table beside me. The documents inside now, heavy with implications I was only beginning to grasp. My hands trembled not from fear, not from strategy, but from the weight of years spent believing in someone who had been steadily erasing me. I tried to sit with the calm, to focus on the plan, the numbers, the strategy with the board. But it was impossible. The emotions I had buried, the humiliation, the betrayal, the quiet resentment I had swallowed for years, they all collided at once, leaving me raw and shaking. I thought about the early days, the version of myself I had been, the woman who laughed freely at his jokes, who stayed up late preparing presentations he would deliver, who smoothed over his missteps in meetings and convinced herself that love meant silence, compromise, and loyalty. I remembered the sacrifices, opportunities I had turned down, friends I had neglected, nights I had spent supporting him while my own ambitions were shelved in favor of his thought. Tears came suddenly, hot and unbidden, streaming down my cheeks. I cried for the woman I had been, for the life I had surrendered, for the moments I had trusted a man who smiled so easily while plotting my public humiliation. I cried for the betrayal, so intimate it left no mark on the body, only on the soul. Thought every sob carried a memory. Him dismissing my ideas during board meetings, subtly undermining me in front of colleagues, the way he would lecture me on priorities while I silently handled crises he never noticed. All the while, I had told myself I loved him, that this was just ambition, that this was just stress. And now the truth pressed down on me like lead. He had never respected me, never valued me, never truly seen me. I wept for the humiliation in the conference hall, the cold indifference in his gaze, the silence that had screamed louder than any accusation. I wept for the secret knowledge I now held, for the power he could never have anticipated, and for the irony that it had taken public shaming for me to remember my own strength. The tears blurred the outlines of the apartment, but slowly they began to dry. I pressed my palms against my face, inhaling deeply, forcing the air into my lungs as if each breath could wash away the bitterness. Anger began to replace sorrow. Clarity began to cut through despair. I remembered the mentor's words, "Trust yourself more than you trust him." I remembered the documents proving my 47% stake. I remembered Mark, Eleanor, and Robert, all standing ready to follow my lead. I realized that while betrayal had knocked me down, it had also reminded me of who I truly was: capable, intelligent, and unstoppable. When fully awakened, I sat upright, wiping the last traces of tears from my cheeks. My body still trembled, but the trembling had changed. It was no longer weakness. It was the electricity of potential, the tension of impending action. I could feel the momentum building, the power humming beneath my skin, coursing through my fingers, settling into a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with revenge, yet everything to do with justice. I glanced at the stack of documents again. The envelope that had begun this journey of revelation now felt like a talisman. It wasn't just ownership, it was permission. Permission to act. Permission to reclaim what had been denied. Permission to stop hiding. I drew in another deep breath, letting it steady my racing heart. My reflection in the window looked back at me, a woman transformed by betrayal, forged in humiliation, and now armed with clarity and authority. I whispered to myself, low and steady. A promise and a warning rolled into one. He suspended me. Now it's my turn. The morning light felt different as I stepped out of the car, the chill in the air biting lightly at my skin. I wore the same outfit from the day before, the one I had been humiliated in front of the entire office. I didn't change. I didn't hide. Every stitch, every crease, every faint reminder of yesterday's shame became a statement. I had not been broken. Not then, not now. I carried the humiliation like armor. Walking through the lobby, I felt eyes flicker in recognition and disbelief. Whispers trailed behind me, but I didn't falter. I held my head high, letting my posture speak louder than any words. By the time I reached the boardroom, my heart was steady, my mind razor sharp. The conference room doors opened, and the familiar smell of polished wood and faint coffee greeted me. Chairs were already occupied. Board members, executives, and Mark at his usual place near the end of the table, his expression unreadable but supportive. My husband was already seated, scrolling through his tablet, completely unaware. He glanced up just once, offering a small, confident smile, the kind CEOs give when they think nothing can surprise them. He had no idea how wrong he was. The lawyer, Eleanor, stood and addressed the room. "We are here for a standard board meeting," she began, voice calm but firm. Then she paused, letting the words settle like a blade before delivering the cut. "However, there are serious matters that must be addressed first." I watched as confusion rippled across the faces in the room. My husband's confident smile faltered almost imperceptibly. Eleanor continued, placing stacks of documents on a table. "We have evidence of fraud, financial misconduct, and misuse of company funds. Several transactions appear to have been unauthorized, violating both corporate policy and HR protocols." Guests filled the room. Murmurs erupted, but Eleanor held up a hand, silencing them. She gestured to me, and I rose slowly, deliberately, letting the weight of the moment settle. Every eye in the room followed me. I could feel the tension, the curiosity, the disbelief. I took a breath, letting my calmness amplify my presence. I was no longer the embarrassed wife from yesterday. I was the person who had uncovered the truth, who held the mentor's trust in my hands, who had the power to reclaim what had been denied. "My name is on 47% of this company," I said, voice steady, controlled. I inherited this stake from the mentor, whose foresight and trust in me ensured the company's survival against reckless leadership. I paused, letting the words sink in. "It has come to my attention that our CEO has violated his fiduciary duties, misappropriated funds, and deliberately attempted to mislead the board and HR to cover up these actions." My husband's eyes widened slightly, his fingers tightening round the armrests. He was used to controlling narratives. He wasn't used to being confronted, especially by someone he had underestimated. I let a moment of silence stretch between us, the weight of anticipation building. Before I delivered the blow, I moved to remove the CEO from his position immediately. The room erupted. Board members whispered, some looking at each other in disbelief, others nodding subtly, relief mixing with shock. Mark's face betrayed the smallest hint of a smile, and I caught Eleanor's approving glance. My husband stood abruptly, shock and anger flickering across his features. "What are you saying?" he demanded, voice rising. But I remained seated, calm, immovable. His rage only made me sharper, more composed. "I am saying that his actions have endangered this company, violated trust, and broken the rules that bind this organization. The board has the authority to vote, and the evidence is clear. The vote will be held immediately," Eleanor said, her voice unwavering. He opened his mouth, searching for arguments, for excuses, for anything that could reverse this moment. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the board's expressions left no room for denial. Every document, every transfer, every HR report, every witness testimony had been compiled meticulously. He had thought he could humiliate me, sideline me, manipulate the narrative. Instead, he had handed me the ultimate weapon, visibility. I stood then, letting the silence settle around me, calm, powerful, dominant not with anger, but with authority and truth. I could feel the shift in energy, the subtle tilting of balance in the room. I wasn't just reclaiming power, I was exposing reality. Board members glanced at each other, then at me, then back at him. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to acknowledgement. I could feel the tide turning, every heartbeat of mine aligned with purpose and certainty. And as I watched the man who had suspended me just 24 hours ago realize that he had lost more than control, more than power, he had lost the narrative, the leverage, the illusion of dominance. The room hung in anticipation, every eye on me, every mind processing that the woman they had dismissed, humiliated, and underestimated was now the one holding the gavel, the vote, the authority. And with that, the first true gasp of acknowledgement left the room, echoing round the boardroom walls. The wife, the subordinate, the underestimated, was now the unstoppable. The air in the boardroom felt electric, almost suffocating. My husband's face was red, a mix of fury and disbelief, his hands clenching the edges of the conference table. "This is preposterous," he shouted. "You're framing me. These accusations are false. You have no authority to." I ignored him, letting the room absorb his unraveling. The CFO, Mark, stepped forward, calm and precise, and laid out the evidence again. Each document, each transaction, each suspicious account transfer was presented with surgical clarity. The numbers didn't lie, and neither did the timestamps, the signatures, or the HR records. Eleanor, our legal advisor, joined in, her tone even but unwavering. "We've cross-referenced every transaction, every report, every account. The evidence is conclusive. Misappropriation, fraud, and breach of HR policy are all documented. Additionally, there's verified evidence of inappropriate relationships with subordinates, violating company ethics and legal standards." The room went quiet. Board members leaned forward, scanning files and murmuring in disbelief. A few shook their heads slowly, as if realizing they had been complicit in silence. My husband's voice rose again, desperate, venom dripping through every word. "You'll regret this. You think you've won. You're destroying your own life, your own career. You think I'll let you." But I didn't flinch. I remained seated, calm, deliberate. The humiliation he had tried to impose on me yesterday now mirrored in him today, and I watched it unfold without mercy. His power, once absolute, was evaporating in real time. The HR manager, previously silent, spoke up. "I can confirm the violations regarding personal relationships, documentation, emails, and witness statements all support these findings. Company policy has been breached." It was like a final nail driven into a coffin. The room held its collective breath as the board reviewed the evidence. Even he, standing there, could feel it. He had no room to maneuver, no allies strong enough to counteract the tide of truth. Eleanor turned to the board, her voice steady and commanding. "The vote is now. All members present may cast their decision on the removal of the CEO from his position." The murmurs erupted into a coordinated response. Hands rose, documents signed, proxies counted. Each affirmative vote echoed louder than the last, building momentum, leaving no doubt. My husband's jaw tightened. His eyes darted from one board member to another, panic rising. He tried to speak, to argue, to plead, but every attempt was drowned by the consensus forming round me. Finally, Eleanor's voice rang clear. "The vote is unanimous. The CEO is hereby removed from his position, effective immediately." A tense silence followed. Then, security officers entered the room. They moved with quiet authority, guiding him to the door. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. He had tried to humiliate me in front of the company, but now he was being escorted out in the exact same manner. Powerless and exposed, he paused at the threshold, eyes burning with fury. He looked at me, hatred spilling from every word he tried to choke back. "This isn't over," he spat, voice low, venomous. "You think this is victory? You'll regret this. I will destroy you." I stood, meeting his gaze steadily, letting the silence stretch between us like steel. His threats, once terrifying, now felt hollow. His power had been effaced, and I had just stripped it away. The door closed behind him, and a strange calm settled over the room. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension release from my shoulders. The board members, some still shaking, others wide-eyed, turned their attention to me. Relief, respect, and cautious admiration reflected in their faces. I realized in that moment how heavy the past 24 hours had been, not just the humiliation, but the fear, the betrayal, the anger. And yet, here I was, standing taller than I had ever stood, not just vindicated, but empowered, not just strong, but untouchable. I looked around the room, the weight of authority settling naturally over me. The company, the mentor's vision, the legacy we had built, it was mine to protect now. And he had fallen, and I was ready to let legal documents were heavy in my hands, crisp and final. Each signature I made felt like a drumbeat marking the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. I signed my name carefully, deliberately, letting each stroke reinforce the power I had quietly carried all along. 47% wasn't just a number anymore, it was authority, legitimacy, and the culmination of every sacrifice, every humiliation, every sleepless night I had endured. When I placed the final signature, the room erupted in a mix of applause, murmurs, and a few audible gasps. Some employees clapped quietly, their faces awash with disbelief. Others cried softly, overwhelmed by the reversal of fortune unfolding before them. I caught a few colleagues glancing at each other, sharing expressions that said, "She's one of us, and she just claimed what she earned." Mark, standing beside me, handed me the CEO nameplate that had once belonged to my husband. I held it in my hands for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the symbolism. Slowly, deliberately, I set it on my desk. The act was simple, almost mundane, but the power it represented was immense. The same office that had witnessed my humiliation was now mine in every corner, every window, every polished surface, a territory I had earned through courage, strategy, and patience. I rose from my chair and looked out at the room. My gaze swept over familiar faces, those who had doubted, those who had feared speaking up, those who had silently carried the weight of the company's mismanagement. Now, all of them looked at me with respect, relief, and a quiet reverence. I could feel the shift in energy. The room seemed lighter, the air charged with the sense that justice had been restored. I addressed the employees, my voice calm but commanding. "Starting today, we operate with transparency, integrity, and accountability. Misconduct will be investigated thoroughly. Policies will be reformed to honor the mentor's vision, to ensure that no one is ever exploited or silenced again." The applause was stronger this time, more genuine. A few whispered thanks. Others simply nodded, their eyes bright with hope. I realized that my victory wasn't just personal, it was collective. It was for every employee who had suffered in silence, every loyal team member who had watched the company wobble under reckless leadership, every mentor and colleague who had believed in the values we were now restoring. I turned to Mark and Eleanor, acknowledging their unwavering support. Their smiles were subtle but meaningful. Approval, relief, and trust rolled into a glance. Together, we had orchestrated a takeover that was as much about justice, it was about leadership.